Chad and Corey, thanks so much for taking the time to hop on this interview. We've done a couple leads that have been really fun with partnering Dreyfus wineries, and you're up next. So we're very excited. And what we're doing is we're polling questions from wholesalers and internal Dreyfus employees just to kind of guide and learn more about the history and your family and where you came from, why you settled in Walla Walla, etc. And both of you and your wives' family business moved here from Wisconsin with strong agricultural backgrounds, and then you all got into unique career paths afterwards. Can you just kind of bring us up to date on where you all grew up, tell us about the farms, why you settled in Walla Walla, and so forth?
Absolutely. You bet, Grant. Good to be here with you today. Thanks for having us. Excited to be able to share a little bit of our story and answer some specific questions that our customers have out there in the marketplace. Yeah, as you mentioned, our home state of Wisconsin, all proud cheeseheads, so to speak, our lovable nicknames from being from Wisconsin, from the Badger State. We grew up in the north central part of the state, kind of between Green Bay and Minneapolis, pretty much smack dab in the middle, in an area called Wausau, the Wausau area, Marathon County specifically. And we all grew up in the agriculture background. Chad grew up west of there in a community called Chippewa Falls. Home of Line and Kugel's Beer is kind of their claim to fame. And our claim to fame in that part of the state is dairy. It's probably the highest concentration of dairy cattle. When we were growing up there, it's changed a lot over the last 20 plus years. But our wives, Chad Samar, my wife, Janet and Cindy, respectively, they grew up on a classic Wisconsin dairy, family of 5, and mom and dad had the kids out in the barn from a young age, and they milked about 85 head of Holstein, and they did that their entire career. And all the kids ended up graduating from college, got 4-year degrees, and walked into various different backgrounds, and Janet found herself in hospitality. Cindy was in nursing, and then myself, I graduated from La Crosse on the Mississippi River in business, and my mom and dad were also in agriculture. They cultivated ginseng and exported to Hong Kong, and I had no aspirations of wanting to farm, so I got into the corporate world and spent about a decade in pharma and biotech, and medical sales is where I ended. And Chad also has a food science degree from Wisconsin Stout, and after various food production positions, he also transitioned into pharma and biotech when he had moved out to the Northwest after being in food production here in the Northwest for several years. That kind of gives you a little bit of our background.
So then why did you specifically settle in Walla Walla opposed to Yakima or Willamette Valley or California?
Yeah, well, when Jen and I moved to Portland in '98 to 2003, before we moved out here to Walla Walla, spent a lot of time out in wine country, and they make a lot of great Pinot Noir down there, like the Drouin family. But just didn't want to just make Pinot Noir, I guess. Didn't want to do California, lots of noise down there, barriers to entry. It was kind of my introduction to Washington wine as well, and started tasting quite a bit of Washington wine, and some of my favorite producers out in Walla Walla. And started looking around the landscape of Washington, and Eastern Washington specifically, wanting to be, out with the vines, because we don't, you can't ripen, I guess, Cabernet and Big Reds on the other side of the mountains where the Pinot Noir is grown. And all signs pointed to Walla Walla. It's truly the gem of the Washington wine industry. It's an incredible place to grow grapes, make wine, and live, and raise a family like Corey is. So it's very special. It was pretty easy decision.
So what was the first vintage that you produced?
2003. We moved out Memorial Day weekend. Corey and Cindy had never been to Walla Walla. Janet, she decided to do it sight unseen as well. We packed up the U-Haul. They flew out, helped us drive out with Chase. She was, I think, about 6 months old then or something. and she's a little baby. And that was their first time seeing it. They ended up moving out a few months after that. So
love it. And then you all own a couple different vineyards that are estate fruit, but you also source some fruit from some of the other top vineyards in the state. What year was the first vineyard purchase? Which one was it? And then how has it grown since?
right.
Yep. So in 2006, we had the opportunity to purchase a small vineyard that would become known as Scotty Block. And Janet and Chad actually acquired that vineyard with the aspirations or thought that they might build a house at some point in the future there. And at that time, that vineyard was just about a little over 4 acres. And then we planted the rest of it out. Today, it's about 7.5 acres. Sits on 11 acres of ground, and it actually is the home site of our winery for Dusted Valley. That particular vineyard is named after our Wisconsin roots, and we pay homage to the state of Wisconsin by calling it Scotty Block, which is a term of endearment for those of us from Wisconsin. Like I said, there's a lot of Scotty pride. And then in 2007, after Chad and I had really become acquainted with Christophe Rhone from Cayuse and his famous Syrahs from the Rocks District, we wanted to really have the opportunity to work with fruit from down on the Rocks, which is on the Milton Freewater, Oregon side of the Walla Walla AVA. And however, there wasn't a lot of fruit being planted down there. Christophe and Tom Walliser were probably two of the bigger names that were growing fruit there. They probably accounted for, I would say, probably 75 to 80% of the fruit that was being grown in the Rocks at that time. When Chad and I first tasted those wines in 03 with Christophe, we were probably tasting his 2000s, 2001s, and we were pretty blown away by those wines. They were just so unique and different. So we wanted a piece of that action. And after talking to several folks down there for several growing seasons, we were able to find the opportunity to buy an orchard in that area about a quarter mile from Christophe's winery. And in January 2007, we closed on that. We put an investment group together to acquire that 20-acre vineyard site, cleared the orchard, and got into construction and building the vineyard in the Rocks. So quite the process. Today, it's about 17 acres of vines, and it's mostly Syrah. There's 3 different clones of Syrah there. We also have a little bit of Mourvèdre and a little bit of Tempranillo planted there as well. So.
And Chad, who are you holding? I mean,
It's Bosley. Feel like that.
Very cute. With the Rocks District and the Syrah, with the plantings, some of them you have a trellis, and other ones you have in the bush vine or Goulet style, correct?
Yeah, we have 3 trellis systems down there. The kind of traditional bilateral up and over with a vertical shoot position, kind of straight up. And the fan, it's kind of everything old is new again. So something that used to be done, it was kind of fell out of favor, and we tried it and loved it. And we saw some fruit down there too, and everybody wanted more fan. There was never enough fans, so we actually expanded the fan plantings, and we'll have a little bit more. We're going to be converting up next year. And then, yeah, it's an old head train goblet. So the head is probably 6 inches off the ground. So those are the 3, and with 3 different clones of Syrah as well, with the different trellis systems. So each and every one tastes a little different. It's pretty cool.
Very cool. I have loved to try the different vintages of tall tales and so forth. And Northern Rhone is one of my favorite wine regions in the world. And your wines have that unbelievable, like animal, black olive, gamey character that you think of. I guess if you were to compare it to a region in Northern Rhone or anywhere else in the world, I mean, what do you think the potential is for the Rocks District, and what kind of other international wines do those remind you of?
Oh, high potential. I think it's already kind of proven itself worthy to be measured along some of those world-class and famous regions. You know, Chad, like you, Grant, Chad and I know that we all 3 share this interest in loving those wines from the Northern Rhone. Especially wines from, Cornas and Hermitage. Those are some that really kind of have that really super in-your-face, powerful animal character, which is so unique to what we find in the Rocks district. Albeit the wines in the Rocks are very different in terms of, by comparative, and if you look at the chemistries of those wines, they share a lot of secondary characteristics or tertiary characteristics. That's where a lot of similarities kind of depart, if you will. The wines in the Rocks have a really distinct mouthfeel and richness to them that's unique, I think, and kind of has made its own point of distinction. But definitely very comparable, I think, in terms of the mystique and fun factor, if you will, of those secondary and tertiary characteristics that we get from the famous Northern Rhone.
Yeah, much more approachable in their use too. They're not quite as hard, a little more accessible, a little less acid.
Hollis Nelson had a question, speaking of those rocks and so forth. She would love for you guys to kind of touch base on the Missoula Floods and what kind of impact that has in Walla Walla and Washington wine in general.
Sure, I'll do the quick down and dirty. The soil substructure pretty much in all of eastern Washington was laid down about 14-ish average a million years ago, with a couple of largest basalt lava flows. In a lot of places, it's 8,000 plus feet deep. And the Columbia Basin, where all the grapes are pretty much grown, and most of the agriculture in eastern Washington, and it's huge out here, from apples to Concord grapes, potatoes, onions, blueberries, top 5 everything. It's all over out here. But it actually sunk the Earth's crust, so there's a heat sink. So that's why agriculture is so great out here. And then go back to the last ice age, 12,000 plus years ago. Glacier came across the Canadian border and dammed the Clark Fork River up kind of by Missoula. You can actually see the flood lines when you the cliffs above Missoula. And that backed up the river. And if anyone's ever had a cocktail, like I will later today maybe, ice floats. And the ice dam lost its integrity, and a giant flood, the Missoula Floods is what we call them, occurred and just ravaged everything on the way down through eastern Washington and out the Columbia River, down the gorge, made some deposits in the Willamette as well, and out to the ocean. This happened a number of times. And they say that torrent was like 10 times the combination of all the rivers combined in the world. I mean, you can't even fathom
10 times.
10 times. So big wall, it says 60 miles an hour, a couple 100 feet tall wave coming at you. It would be the ultimate point break surfing moment. For sure. And then our topsoil is mostly windblown loess. There's a little different composite. In some places it's a little saltier, especially by some of the rivers and stuff. But it all blew back, basically from Oregon. So that's our topsoil in Washington State.
That's an interesting story with the past. Looking forward, we have a question from Matt Sanborn from Favorite Brands in Texas. Interested to know how climate change is playing a factor, how it will in the future, and being more of a desert climate opposed to like Willamette Valley, what are the differences and what's the vision for kind of combating that looking ahead?
Yeah.
Well, great question, Matt.
Good question, Matt. Absolutely. Climate change is definitely, we've seen it in the 17 years that we've been here. We've seen a lot of varying weather patterns, and I think that's the biggest. I would say that's the biggest piece that we've noticed is wilder swings from high highs to low lows. So weather patterns are just a lot more unpredictable, and so where things didn't fluctuate as wildly, or the seasons didn't fluctuate as wildly in the past, we're seeing more fluctuation. So, as an example of that, Matt, in 2010, 2011, we went from the coolest vintages recorded in modern viticultural history in Washington to 2015 being the hottest in the span of a 4-year period. So, we're seeing those kinds of lopsided kind of events, if you will. This year we started warming up really rapidly in the early part of like February, and then we were concerned that we were going to have to deal with spring freeze issues, which was very rare for us because we typically don't warm up and get into growing conditions until later. And so we definitely had some freeze events here that we typically don't see in late March, early April. You know, as our frost free is typically usually right around the first week of May is when we're kind of out of the woods with that. This year we had potential freeze events from basically the first week in April, and we had growth already happening in different plant species, and vines were starting to wake up, all for basically a 4 to 6 week period until we were out of frost zone. Those are some of the examples of things that we're dealing with, which typically you only find in a real coastal viticulture area. As far as the high desert, a lot of people talk about that being high desert here. We actually, you know, in Walla Walla, we're a little bit unique. We're not really classified as a desert region here. We get about a total of 16 inches of total precipitation on average per year. Once you're in the foothills, which is about 5 miles from my house, you're closer to about 40 inches of precipitation per year. We actually have vineyards, not we, but in the valley, we have vineyards here in Walla Walla Valley growing at about 2,000 foot elevation, between 1,500 and 2,000 foot elevation, that are in that band that are being dry farmed. And then the southern and western part of the AVA is more reminiscent of what you're going to find in the Columbia Basin that Chad was talking about previously, which there the precipitation is going to probably be about 10 inches annually. So, you know, just in the span of the Walla Walla AVA, which isn't a lot of area, you see a tremendous amount of difference in terms of moisture. When you get to central Washington and the Columbia Basin, you know, you have much more consistently high highs and low lows, and average precipitation, you know, usually runs somewhere between 7 and 10 inches a year. And I would say that's pretty consistent from the Columbia River pretty much to the northern part of the Columbia Valley during the growing season.
So another note on the global warming piece, we are definitely seeing general warming trends, although Corey mentioned us seeing two of the coldest years in our 18-year history. In the middle of that. But Walla Walla AVA itself, looking at the growing degree days compared to, let's say, the Horseheaven Hills or Waluka Slope, Red Mountain, that's warmer, I think we're going to be less affected in grapes ripening or having to pivot and put in later ripening grapes because Walla Walla is kind of that medium riper versus the cooler or hotter parts of the state to begin with. It's kind of always known for a little more earthy and herbal and kind of a little more old world flavors in some of the grape varietals as well, which is inherent with a little bit cooler sites.
Definitely.
Nice. And then getting into the farming and so forth, we have a question from Michelle Eustick with Prestige LaDroit in Maryland. And consumers are looking for a lot more biodynamic and organic bottlings and so forth. Which vineyards are practicing that? And what are you doing differently? What's your long-term strategy? What are the possibilities? Just to kind of touch upon all that.
Yeah, we've been farming sustainable for years and pretty much have mirrored live salmon safe, but haven't paid for the certification. Don't really like paying people to tell us we're doing the right thing, but that's becoming more and more of an issue out in the marketplace. I know in a request and looking for certifications. So we're actually under a pilot program right now with Vinea to get certified. Southwind is already certified. One of our state vineyard, I don't think we talked about when we talked about a state.
We didn't get a chance to talk about that yet, no?
Is salmon safe. So we are farming to those standards already when we're just getting certification after this growing season. We started last one with the certification process. It's the right thing to do.
What's that?
It's the right thing to do. We farm with some really light chemicals. And Chris Bannock is our vineyard manager, if you will. We work with his vineyard management company, I guess. And he's got a nose and a head for a lot of biologics and things like that, and soil health. You know, running hydrogen peroxide for certain things. It's just things that haven't been used in the grape industry for a while, and some of these things are starting to transition and trickle over from some of the other apples and cherries and such. So pretty cool. It's a work in progress.
Oh, perfect. And then we have another question from Matt Sanborn with Favorite Brands in Texas. Are you playing around with any other experimental varietals or replantings of different clones? You were talking to Rocks District and so forth. Chad, I know you were super stoked on doing a limited release pet nat that just got released. So,
Yeah.
let the winery tell us more.
It was my midlife want to be a hipster crisis, I guess. We did pet nat. Curveball. It's actually going to be released this week or next week or something like that. With everything going on, we've kind of put a few of these things a little bit of the back burner, and but that'll be coming out named in honor of the lady's father, and called Curveball. Great story behind that. We do lots of experimentation, certainly in the vineyard and the winery. We do a lot of small ferments when they bring things into the winery, and with stems or with nutrients. We've gone to mostly all native fermentations. We're starting some of those fermentations out in the vineyard now. Doing all sorts of things all the time. So hopefully it'll bring more complexity and layers and depth and breadth of flavors to our wine in the future. And that's what we're finding, especially with our vineyards getting some more age on them as well. And we've pretty much moved, besides 2 wines, I think, almost to a vineyard designate model now with the 18 vintage to truly express, I guess, our version of vintage, varietal, and vineyard in any particular year. So that's been a lot of fun and a lot of experiments. Pretty exciting to finally get there.
One thing that's really fun about Dusted Valley that I always thought about is kind of your focus and family members with certain bottlings. And Corey, I'm looking right above you. If you turn around, you got a fun poster of Vernon Roads.
Yep. Yeah, that's Chad actually as a baby, and in his grandpa's hand, working on his balancing act. There is his walking the tightrope.
Right before I joined the circus.
Yeah, ran away and joined the circus. Been walking the tightrope ever since. Yeah, we definitely honor our family members. Dusted Valley, the brand is about family. It's about that's the people. And, the place is Walla Walla. And obviously the thing that we're proud of is the wine that we create from the place and that we live and grow these grapes and farm these wines. But yeah, we like to honor the instrumental people in our lives that kind of help form who we are today. And yeah, Grandpa Vern, I don't have to speak for Chad, but I know that he's a tremendous guy in his life. And then my Grandpa Fred was a tremendous man in my life. And so our top Syrah is named after Grandpa Fred, which is called Tall Tales, because he loved to tell stories. And that was like some of my fondest memories of spending time with my grandfather is just the stories that he would tell, which were just awesome and legendary. He had 17 grandkids, and every single grandkid knows the story. So it's pretty cool. The oral tradition was something pretty special there. But yeah, Chad can share with you his story about Grandpa Rhodes as well, kind of growing up with him.
VR Special. When he passed away, we named our Cabernet after Grandpa and his world famous chocolate chip cookie, the VR Special. He ran the student union at Stout, where I graduated and Janet graduated. And we go visit him and take the tour, and we'd always watch him, making chocolate chip cookies. We end up back in his office eating a big old cookie as big as her head and drinking milk, and we called him the VR Special. So it's for the VR
so
Special.
Where can people go online to find the recipe for these VR Special chocolate chip cookies?
Family secret.
I had to ask.
But and then there's always Squirrel Tooth Alice as well, one of our Grenache-based wines from Stone Tree. We always give who's ever in the tasting room with me. I always, whether it's Janet or Corey, I always say it's their great grandmother, and we don't know who Grandpa was.
It's not though. Just to be clear, it's not. Squirrel Tooth Alice was the madam of Dodge City, Kansas, back in the 1860s. So she ran the brothel there, and so Chad likes to have a little fun with us and let us know that our lineage must have came through Dodge City, Kansas. We don't think it did, though. We don't think it did. Chad came across Squirrel Tooth Alice in the book when he did the Pendleton Underground tour years back, and which had a book about history of prostitution in the early West. So we had the Stained Tooth Society, our wine club, and the Stained Tooth Syrah. So when they found Squirrel Tooth Alice, we couldn't help ourselves. We had to have a line extension, and it sounds so much more fun than GSM, doesn't it, Grant?
Yes. For sure.
Of course, we have the BFM, which you're drinking right now.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's the 2013 vintage.
Yeah, Grant, I'll let you tell everybody what BFM stands for.
No, I would tell people to go to the Woodinville tasting room and find that front and back sheet with everybody on that.
Yeah, there's
That's
some
a
nasty.
good point. Check it out.
As long as you get the F right, that's all that matters.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious what the F stands for. But blowing minds. How about that? Blowing minds.
It's a good way to put it. All right, so to recircle back, Chad, you coming from a food science background, Kate wants to know with the screw caps, was that part of the vision from the beginning? And I know you hate getting a quart bottle of wine as everybody else does, but how come you guys were so set on that, and what have been the great successes from it?
Yeah. Well, from the food production side of things, I did quality control and a little quality assurance. And at that point, before we started the winery, we would certainly drank a lot of wine and found a lot of corked wine, bad bottles of wine. And to me, it was unacceptable, the failure rate. And even to this day, it's still 4% plus. Sean Sullivan, we know him, who writes for the Wine Enthusiast, he keeps track of it every year. It's called Cork 40. And he's hitting about 4% every year. And that's with some pretty good, quality corks. We've worked far too hard in the vineyard and in the winery to gamble with a closure, in my eyes. I mean, it's rumor has it we put men on the moon, and I would think technology has come up with a better idea than sticking a piece of cork bark in a bottle to seal it. You need a tool. Part of the pomp and ceremony about wine that I don't really care for to begin with. It's a delicious beverage that's meant to be enjoyed with people and, with food and all sorts of stuff. So it goes kind of contrary to me, to some of my core beliefs in wine. And when we started, I don't know if it was probably my idea, brought up to Corey, and Corey didn't really fight me on it at all. I don't think he had probably experienced the same. So we'd never put a cork in wine. We used a synthetic cork for the first couple of years because the only screw cap line when we started mobile bottling line was down in Oregon. And the first couple bottlings we had, we didn't have enough to bring that bottling truck up. So with our, I guess, depending on white or red, third, fourth vintage, we started with the screw caps. And Stelvin screw caps, love them. And their technology has come a long way. They've got like 4 different kinds of oxygen permeation. So it can be the same as the cheap crappy cork or the best cork in the world. Those Grand Cru Burgundies that are like wood when you flick them and not spongy. That lets about the same amount of air in as a screw cap. So people say you can't age wine under screw cap lines. They're ignorant of that.
They're jerking your chain, Grant. They're jerking your chain, man.
But I understand people still use cork. People expect it. I think that is changing with the generation. Young people these days don't give a shit what they're drinking out of Tetra Paks, cans, whatever. That whole stuff is going away. And all those big guys in Bordeaux and Burgundy, they're all experimenting with screw caps too. They're just worried about consumer perception for the most part. My personal opinion. When I talk to people anyways, that's what they say.
Yeah. Another unique thing about what you all do is you use a little bit of Wisconsin oak with some of the wines, tying in your heritage and upbringing and so forth. And what's the difference between that and French oak, and what wines are seeing it?
Sure. I'll start and I'll hand it off to Corey because it's kind of the his property grew up on is when we first started sourcing some stuff down there. We had tried a barrel from Segan Moreau, I think it was. That was a heavy toast barrel, and it didn't taste like the rest of the American oak we were experimenting with that we weren't huge fans of. hallmark of that, coconut and vanilla and dill kind of stuff. And it didn't taste like that. And we're like, wow, what is this? And we kind of find out that it was sourced from Minnesota, back up where the northern forest, I guess it's as high north as Quisirus grows in the United States. And much, what do you got there, Corey? Much, there it is, Wisconsin oak.
Yeah.
It's so much tighter grained. And then we were aging it 3-4 years. We're partnering with Rhone now, and they're aging it in Napa. And some special kind of proprietary toast that we played with that we use on them. So it has a little more sweetness than a lot of French oak. We've had in lineups with French oak, and we've haven't been able to really tell the difference, like pick it out, that's American oak, that's French. And we've had French barrels that tend to show coconut and vanilla more than some of these American oak barrels. But so that's kind of, we got the source. And then Corey started thinking about his forest where he grew up by the river, right?
Yes, exactly. So as Chad mentioned, Kirkcaldy American white oak, it's the 45th parallel is pretty much as far north as it grows in the continental United States. And so I remember growing up in my mom and dad's woods, and guess where we live? Literally, we live at the 45th parallel and 90th meridian, which puts you halfway between the equator and the North Pole, and literally in the middle of the northern and western hemisphere, right? So it's pretty much as far north as Kirkcaldy is going to grow. I remember in my mom and dad's woods, we had white oak trees, and they're slow growing. So a 70-year old oak tree would literally be as round as that barrelhead I just shared with you. So they're very slow growing. They typically grow in kind of the river plains or the tributaries. So they need a little bit of marshland, not swampland. They need a little bit more moisture. So they kind of grow in a lot of the waterways. So my mom and dad's property fits that really to the T. And so I knew there was a number of these trees hanging around. And they had all these wild grapevines growing out of them and stuff like that through the years. And I remember having them, and they didn't have a lot of value because white oak's not really the preferred oak for furniture making and that kind of thing. People preferred red oak for tables and whatnot. So a lot of times, white oak was being cut for semi-floors, believe it or not. So I asked my dad, hey, what do we ever do with those white oak trees? Are they still growing on our property? He's like, yeah, they're still there. So we're able to work some of those trees in as well to the story, and it fits in perfectly to what we've experienced with white oak, being super dense, tight grain from that area. So
yeah, and as Corey was talking about, most of the oak in the United States and furniture and for barrels is down in the Ozark and Appalachian forests, and a 70-year-old tree, as he was talking about, would be probably twice the size circumference. Big difference.
And I guess talking more unique aspects of what's happening inside the winery, you have a fun egg you're playing with that's seeing, or Olson Vineyard Chardonnays partially going into that, is that correct? And how did that come about, and what was the first vintage, and are you doing a more percentage for that in future bottlings?
Yeah, that's back to that point I was talking about earlier, is kind of developing techniques to add breadth and flavors. So when we go to blend wines, we can blend in, flinty reduction and different textures in wine. So on that scale, a new barrel, typically our Chardonnay is it's under 20% new. Lots of neutral barrels that aren't imparting oak flavor or tannin to the wine. It's softened it around for sure. And then the egg, it's pretty cool to watch. It's actually high density polyethylene, so you can just see the action of it just stirring the leaves the whole time it's fermenting. Really cool. Then we use stainless barrels as well, and it's a little more reductive, a little leaner wine, but trying to come up with more of those flinty, reductive characters, which I love in so many wines. I mean, not to the point where
I'm with you, yeah.
burnt rubber or anything like that, because I've tasted those in a few. I'm not looking for mercaptans, but to add layers and make wines more interesting instead of, you kind of go from squeaky clean to doing things purposefully to kind of get them a little funky.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So when you're both not drinking Dusted Valley wines, what regions, producers, cocktails?
Yeah.
I mean, what are you imbibing with?
I mean, after we get done with the DDO and Rose Rock, it's good stuff.
I think seasonality dictates for me quite a bit, actually. I think if I'm talking about this time of year, I find myself looking for a lot of whites and rosés, especially during the week when I'm not drinking too heavily or looking for something lighter. Because I'm a binge drinker on the weekends, Grant. I really pound it hard on the weekends, but Bob can edit that out. So I guess, as far as obviously loving a lot of the stuff that's in your portfolio, frankly, on the whites and rosé side. Still am a huge fan of dry Riesling. And we actually are we worked on a small dry Riesling project this year for PCC, as you know. It's been fun to have that wine around, super crisp and dry, bone dry. So that's been a lot of fun. But then it's getting into the more serious reds. Absolutely. We talked about the Northern Rhone. Love those wines. I'm probably more of a fan of the Northern Rhone today than of the Southern Rhone, but don't get me wrong, I still love any wines that are from the village that are just, that really overdrink for their price point, that are just good all around drinkers. I still appreciate what those wines are. But yeah, I love Burgundy when I can find stuff that I can afford these days. There's a lot of beautiful wines coming out of France, of course. But also some of the stuff that's coming out of Bordeaux in terms of even third growths and not having to spend first growth money by any means to get some really beautiful wines. And yeah, I mean, honestly, we drink pretty non-discriminately. We drink a lot of Washington wine too.
Yeah, I was going to say, keep going, Corey.
Well, I will say one other thing. Probably the wine that lasts the shortest amount around here is honestly Oregon Pinot Noir. That's no joke. Just because, everything that I mentioned, for the most part, aside from Burgundy, is stuff that we make, right? So we're around those wines a lot. So I would say that when I can't get my hands on Burgundy, if I'm drinking Oregon Pinot Noir, those wines are the wines that my wife and I tend to drink the quickest. So, which reminds me, probably I need to get some more DDO.
Yeah. Yeah, and for me, it's like mood, like music, kind of time of year, what you're eating. Love bubbles, a huge fan. Then yeah, the Bridge off Corey stuff, like even Chinon, love Cab Franc. I know Corey's a big fan of Cab Franc. The wines that aren't this big monolithic things that some of that, typical California cult cab kind of thing. It's just, can't do it. Things that with a little bit more of a deft touch. There's some great stuff coming out of California as well, but cooler parts of California. Yeah.
Central Coast, Santa Barbara.
Yep. Yeah. And, people always ask me what I drink the most, what my favorites, and I'm not a person of favorites. I like to, let's spice the life for sure. But the Northern Rhone section in my cellar, I can never keep enough wine in there, and Oregon Pinot Noir. And been able to get my hands on some great aged Washington wine in auctions back in the 90s and early 2000 stuff. And it's amazing how well those hold up. And Corey and I drink a fair bit of that as well. We put together when we get our hands on it.
Very cool. And to wrap the whole thing up, Clement in New York City, what's the one thing you want everyone to remember about Dusted Valley and what sets it apart from so many other wineries?
The one thing?
The thing.
In 5 words or less? For us, we always talk about people, place, and wine, and our family. When Corey mentioned that earlier, it's we've really come together and kind of bootstrapped this. It's a great story. We didn't come from wine backgrounds, and to be able to pull off and create and craft what we have done and are doing in such a short period of time, in one generation, it's pretty cool American story. In Walla Walla in Washington, I always make the joke, it's blind squirrel finds nut when we moved out here, because we started making some great wines just from year one. I mean, it literally, I think, is one of the best places to grow much of what we do in Eastern Washington in the United States. I think it's a better place to grow fruit wholesale than California. It's like if I'm drinking Pinot Noir, I'm going to Oregon because it's just cooler. It has more in common with Old World and Burgundy, and that's certainly where my palate goes. And Washington State, I think, has that in spades. Now, is that one thing?
Perfect.
It can't be just one thing, man.
Corey?
Yeah, it's always, I mean, I would echo everything that Chad said. Certainly no disagreements there. It's always I get asked the question a lot. I've been getting asked that for 17 years. And you always want to basically come up with something that really does point out and differentiate you in this complete flooded ocean of wine, let's face it. And so you try to really kind of figure out how you can differentiate yourself and how you can stand out. And that's always a really difficult thing to do. But I would say, that being said, the one thing that is, I think, a point of differentiation is the wines speak about place. I think our wines speak about place more so than so many wineries that are being scored and achieving accolades. Because if you look at our wines, Grant, and you know them well, the style of the winemaking is all about bringing that expression of place out. The wines have higher levels of acid. There's more freshness to them. There's more vibrancy to them. There's more minerality, and we don't apologize for those things to be in those wines. We want Cabernet to taste like Cabernet. We want Merlot to taste like Merlot. We want Syrah to have a little bit of that animal. And so you'll find that in our wines that are wholesaling for, $10. You find it obviously in our vineyard designate wines that are wholesaling for $70. So that's the gamut.
Well, Chad and Corey, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to answer these questions and teach us all about the history and the comings about and what makes Walla Walla and Dusted Valley so special. So thank you both so much. Hope to get together soon. And hope you guys have a wonderful summer in 2020.
Likewise.
Cheers.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers.